Hello and welcome to another edition of Pollock and Thurston. I am John Pollock. He is Brandon Thurston. Both of us are indoors right now, staying away from the toxic air that is permeating throughout the Northeast United States, coming courtesy of Canada that everyone is blaming us for. How are you doing today, Brandon?
I'm good. The air quality seems to be better today than it was yesterday, but it definitely smelled like someone was cooking up some hot dogs or something yesterday.
Yes, it's quite the unique smell if you are out and about wherever you are, whether you are in Buffalo, whether you are in Toronto, or all parts in between. But the question I want to ask you right off the top, Brandon, is if you were David Zaslav, would you hypothetically hire Kendall Roy to run CNN?
I would definitely hire Tom Wambsgams.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well,
we will
maybe some CNN chatter will come up. But today we have a special guest joining us. You have heard his voice on Wrestling Observer Live, We're Live Pal, and of course the Mat Man podcast, a great reporter joining us for the first time, Andrew Zarian from an undisclosed location. Andrew, thanks for jumping on with us.
I'm live from my bunker in New York City to escape the toxic fumes that have been infecting all of us here. John, thanks so much for having me. Brandon, it's always great to do something with you. Two of my favorite people in wrestling media. So this is a treat for me to be honest.
Well, you're in an undisclosed location. We have an ultra double secret spreadsheet of guests that we seek out, and Andrew Zarian, definitely someone on the list. So this was the week that we wanted to have you on because, with Collision coming up on June 17th, you've done a lot of great reporting pretty much from the get-go of this being an idea that formed and now into this 2-hour primetime show for AEW. Going back to when you were starting to first hear rumblings about the idea of a new Saturday night show, what were some of your initial impressions about what this would mean for how this would change the face of AEW and how it operates?
So initially, I was speaking to Brandon a ton about this because I was kind of going back and forth because some of the conversations was being pieced together as I was getting the information amongst people in Warner Media. I was told this over a dinner sometime early March that there's another AEW show coming, and it's most likely on Saturdays and possibly at 6:00. And the person had asked me is there something important about the 6:00 time slot? I'm like, yeah, it's a 6:05 time slot, on TBS or TNT. It's historic for wrestling. And I always like getting wrestling news from non-wrestling fans because there's no, I can't imagine they're adding more to the story than what's being presented to them. So it was a conversation over dinner and it was supposed to be a 1-hour show initially. And I was told now it makes more sense that it was a replacement for AEW Dark and Dark Elevation more than anything else. And I guess because of the conversations with Punk kind of working out over the last couple months, they were able to pitch a 2-hour show. Now, I don't know if this came from the Warner Media side initially or the AEW side, but it turned into this. It was never going to be an A show as far as how I was told this. I was told that it was just going to be a show to get more talent on television to get them presented in front of a large national audience rather than being on the internet. So, and then slowly it snowballed, and we saw that report in February that came out that AEW had trademarked the Collision name, and little by little, we were just able to piece this together, and it's not a C show or a B show, it's an A show, an A1 show of sorts, and I love getting the information piece by piece and seeing how it kind of matures into what's going to be presented on TV next week. It was really interesting because I would not have expected if somebody said to me, oh, they're doing another 2-hour show and it's going to be led by CM Punk. I probably would have had to dig deeper because it was so out there to do another 2 hours. But now you're seeing the TV product and it makes all the sense in the world.
Yeah. So you don't think this is something that was contingent on CM Punk and the notion that CM Punk can't be in the same building as certain other people?
I was never told that. It's possible. It really is. It could have become that. But initially, the first thing I was told that this was going to be a 1-hour show. I think they saw the success of the first Battle of the Belts. And I know that the following ones didn't have the high ratings, but the first Battle of the Belts did a solid number. I think it was in the 7s. Wrestlenomics would know better than me. But I think it was in the 7s.
The first one did very well. Yes.
Yeah. Yeah, and it kind of, I think that was maybe the catalyst to this. And it just, I never heard that it was just based on Punk. Maybe the 2 hours was. I think when they got to that Punk's conversation, it might have been based on that. But initially, this was to eliminate Dark Elevation and AEW Dark.
And when we look at sort of where it grows from the idea of a potential 1 hour time slot to a 2, I mean, once you're graduating to 2, this, like, from your understanding, was this always going to be undertaking a second night of production for AEW? Or because that really changes the equation here when you're adding a second night of taping television and all of the expenses that come with it, where this is now suddenly, like, this is a major undertaking by the company and is going to change the lives of many of the wrestlers that are required to be on Saturday, and for some personnel that will be on the road Wednesday and Saturday.
Yeah, I don't think it was going to be another day to film. I don't think it would have been another taping schedule. I think they would have probably replaced whatever they were doing on Dynamite, prior to it, with filming, these matches. If I were to say what a main event would have been on that show, I probably would think like someone like Jarlistico would have been main eventing that show, or you would have Takeshita main eventing that show just to get talent on TV. With a really good main event, that doesn't have to be your A player. Now, once you go to 2 hours, you can't really do that. You can't have people sitting there for 4 to 5 hours of tapings in one shot and not expect the audience to get exhausted. So the 2 hours forces them more than anything else.
Yeah, so I have the January 2022 is the first Battle of the Belts, and you're right. It did 704,000 viewers, 0.27 in the demo. That's like just under what a Dynamite does these days.
Yeah, it's
And if I'm not mistaken, I think that was going against like NFL competition on that Saturday. If I'm
Saturday night in January, sounds
like
right,
that,
yeah.
that tells you like where the interest was, because it was such a throwback to, well, here's Tony Khan's version of Clash of the Champions, and here is a special that there was a lot of interest, but you have seen where that event has sort of settled into. Like the last one, I think we're talking like 400,000 ish viewers is where it's settled in.
415 and 409 were the last two.
Well, there you have it with the
I'm
Battle of the Belts.
curious to see if this question to be asked about whether that show is even going to continue with. I mean, where's it going to air? It's a little bit more jammed now, and you got 2 hours, you got 5 hours total of AEW. Are they going to take the time to do an additional Battle of the Belts show 4 times a year?
Why not? Let's just do a whole like every night of wrestling.
Hour of Rampage. That's what they've been in the last 3. Has been 11 o'clock airings on Fridays. So they've just been like an extra hour onto Rampage. I suppose they could still.
Do you know what the reason for that would be? Why they would? Is it just to fulfill the commitment of X amount of shows per year, and that's the time slot they're putting it in? It's bizarre to do another show following Rampage.
It sort of lines up with like for the Arthur Ashe shows, they've done an extra hour of Rampage for those. And then for every pay-per-view, they do that countdown show after, if not Dynamite, after Rampage. So it seems like there's, they don't mind putting that extra hour on top of what they're already doing on special occasions.
Yeah.
So, Andrew, do you have seen, the announcements that have rolled out from the location being built up to the announcement of Punk, and then on Wednesday night, Punk wrestling? Where do you sense the intrigue level of people for this debut show, and how strong of a foot it's getting off to?
I think the initial show will do really well. I don't know what really well would mean on a Saturday at 8 o'clock with, competition. Obviously, you got a lot of stuff happening on Saturdays. I don't know what that number looks like, but I think, you're going to be higher than most weeks. I'm trying to get a gauge of what the success level for that show would be. I don't think 1 million is their target here. If they do 1 million viewers per show consistently, that would be fantastic. But if we're going to go based on Dynamite numbers and kind of equate that, I think being in the 7s is a very strong number to be in consistently.
And you're talking about like once it's in a steady state. I'm sure the
once
first
in the steady
state be pretty big.
I would say
I would hope so.
If they can be in the range of what we just talked about with that first Battle of the Belt special, like a 0.26, a 0.27. I think that's a very, very healthy figure to aspire to. And Brandon, just coming off of last night, Way and I were discussing this, the idea that you have Punk wrestling, and while not advertised, I think a lot of people are expecting CM Punk to talk on this show. And if you can fill up 2 to 3 quarters with CM Punk, I mean, that is going to significantly boost that first show, in my estimation. And I was not someone that was necessarily expecting to have the Punk match in week 1 that could have been saved. But you look at all of this, like that first show, you should expect a lot of Punk on this show. It certainly heightens what I feel the ceiling is for week 1.
I mean, it would definitely help viewer retention to bookend the show, the first Collision with a Punk promo at the beginning and then a Punk match at the end that you stick around for. I mean, naturally, the first or the second Rampage had an enormous quarter-hour one where Punk was on, and then it went down from there, but still averaged whatever it was, 1.1 million viewers. So it makes a lot of sense to get him in there twice. And as you guys talked about last night, people are probably more interested in hearing from him than seeing him wrestle.
Yeah, I think it's smart to also put him in a mix, you know, a 3-on-3 here, rather than going with the Samoa Joe match that you know that was planned originally. I'm sure they're going to get to that, you know, and I find the Jay White stuff interesting. You know, you're building the future couple feuds on that show, and I'm interested in all of them. So if you see FTR and Bullet Club Gold, or you see Joe and Punk, you know, I think that's intriguing enough to keep fans, you know, tuned in each week. You know, you could build it out for X amount of months and go from there. Now, the question is going to be, is Punk going to be on every week? Is he going to wrestle every week? What happens to the weeks that he's not wrestling or he's not on? Are you going to alternate, you know, people that are, you know, in the elite to be on that show if it's a week that Punk's not on? A lot of this stuff is going to be in the air more than anything else right now.
Yeah, and I expect there's going to be some sort of at least soft brand split to keep the talent, you know, to make it sort of like Raw and SmackDown at least is supposed to be, where you mostly see Roman Reigns, let's say, on SmackDown. I mean, you mostly see Punk on Collision, maybe.
And while we haven't seen beyond, they have explicitly advertised CM Punk for that Greensboro show in August. He has not been attached to the other advertising, at least for Collision. Although I did hear from somebody in Hamilton who stated they had seen some like electronic billboards in Hamilton for the Collision show, which is not doing too well. And Punk's face is on those ads as well. But that's been an interesting part of this whole rollout, is there does seem to be some trepidation in the subsequent cities for Collision that have not seen the movement since Punk's return has been announced. And perhaps some of that is just an unknown. Is Punk attached to these shows? And if that's the skepticism, it does show you what kind of a second AEW show means without a CM Punk.
And the context of that Hamilton show, there's a lot of dilution there. It's because they're doing that Collision on the 29th. I believe that's a Friday after
Thursday.
No, it's a Thursday.
It's a Wednesday, Thursday in Hamilton.
After doing Dynamite the previous night, which was announced first, that's got 3,500 out. And Hamilton is an hour drive from Toronto, right? This comes
not
week
even
after Forbidden Door and the Collision that they're doing there.
Yeah, it's a lot in the market, but I would say even with all of those shows, the fact that Hamilton is under 1,000 it's still somewhat surprising to me. And maybe it's just the idea that there's probably a lot of those fans that are going to Forbidden Door that might have already bought their tickets for Dynamite. And perhaps you just have the question, is Punk even going to be on this show? Because if not, I'm getting the AEW experience at least once that week. Do I need a second night?
Right.
Yeah. How about, Andrew, in terms of where you see Collision kind of just falling into a pattern when once a month you are going to have WWE opposition with a premium live event, and how you handle those shows if you are AEW? Are these sort of your unofficial big specials of the month to combat that? Or do you feel that there's going to be less of a necessarily competitive nature to those nights, that it's just going to fall into, this is the new trend and we don't have to build everything around WWE's schedule when we face them head to head once a month?
Well, I think the first time this happens, the head-to-head with the pay-per-view, they are probably going to counter-program it with, you know, as much as they can put on TV. The other question is going to be, what are you going to do on all those days you're going to be preempted? You know, there's quite a few of them. I would, what was it? It was like 16 dates.
Something like, I would guess maybe in the neighborhood of 10, and most of those probably are going to be the earlier part of the year around the playoffs for the NFL, the NBA and the NHL. There might be some baseball maybe later in this year. Maybe there's some soccer. I mean, I'm just not sure what's going to take priority and how they're going to deal with that. I don't know if there's room in the scheduling for, say, it to go on TBS on some night, but they've demonstrated that they're not switching AEW shows onto other networks, at least not in the last couple of years.
I think the first night of competition with a pay-per-view is going to be SummerSlam.
Yes.
And
which is a pretty big night too when you consider I don't know how much of an impact the Nate Diaz fight is going to have with Jake Paul, but that's going on the same night as SummerSlam. But yeah, SummerSlam will be our first test to see what kind of a collision goes up. A very appropriately named new show for AEW as well.
And that's that's a number 2 pay-per-view they're going up against for WWE. So they either they're going to counter program the hell out of it, or they're just going to just say we're doing a regular taping here,
because Money in the Bank will be in the afternoon U.S. time.
Correct. Yeah. So they will avoid that one. When you following all of the CM Punk stuff as we all have, Andrew, was there sort of a strong feeling you had one way or the other that ultimately this guy, they are going to find a way to work things out and get this guy back in? Was there ever a thought on your part that this would be an untenable situation to bring this guy back into the locker room? What were just some of your own feelings as they've evolved since All Out last year?
I always said if they can make it work, they really should. You don't get a opportunity, especially in wrestling, to get a guy with CM Punk's popularity to the level of popularity that he has in your company. It's a struggle. Most of the guys are locked into contracts, so they can't wrestle anymore. That's the reality. And you had a very unique opportunity with a guy that hasn't wrestled in 7 years to come onto your TV and spearhead you as a solid number 2 or a major competitor to WWE. I always found it so unfortunate what happened. But if you are a strong manager, if you're a strong leader of a company, you are going to do everything you can to make the best business decision, regardless of your personal feelings. CM Punk being in that company, and I know it's unfortunate for a lot of people because they don't like to hear that, is the best decision for that company as far as marketability goes. I'm not talking about the culture because, I don't know what that's going to look like for them. But as far as marketability, you're in a contract year. You need a big name on your TV. You now have a secondary show on Turner property. It was very important to them, and AEW knows this. So whether or not you make it work with the Elite and probably do the biggest match you ever could in that company's history currently, I think this is the best bet to create growth. You have a video game coming out that has to be successful. You have a toy line that has to be successful. Merchandise. You're selling out. They did really well with Wembley, but you're hoping to continue that. And having someone like Punk will help you sell tickets. We're seeing it already for Collision. That he's moved, I think it's something like 1,000 tickets or so. But everybody knew initially when that United Center show was announced that CM Punk was going to be there or anticipating to be there. It just speaks volumes as to his star power, regardless if you like him or not.
And with leading up to the WBD upfront, which was May 17th, there was a lot of anticipation. I was talking about for like weeks in advance. Like I think they're going to announce at least Collision here at the upfront. A lot of people were hearing and talking about a new AEW TV deal, and we've since heard from Tony. I've asked him, Dave Meltzer asked him in the last 2 media conferences and he basically said that the length of the deal is the same still. So it's not like there's a new term and renewed contract apparently. And he did say that there's incremental revenue. I think it's got to be something around now a new deal worth like $70 million for the remainder of what their original term was, which will end either this year or next year. So I know there's, speculation, anticipation is going to be like $1 billion deal, but did you hear any of that?
I heard all the speculation, and I think we spoke a couple of times. The number I was always told prior to this happening was that they really wanted to be in that 100 million mark, a little north of the 100 million mark. So, adding a secondary per year, that was always what I had heard. That's whether that's 125 million or 110 million, I don't know, but they wanted to be north of that 100 million mark. But you now have another show, and you can't. $100 million a year would not be a success for them at that point. They wouldn't look at that as a win. You're offering them another 2 hours, adding more production, adding more expenses. I think Dave did the math, and he said the show is costing somewhere around $36 million a year for the production and to get everything going.
I would say around 26 million, half a million
26
at least. That might be conservative, but yeah, I could see it being worth $36 million a year to produce. Yeah.
Yeah. So
the catering, give or take 10 million in either direction. So that could offset.
So I think for them, if it is $200 million, I know it sounds crazy to give them $1 billion over 5 years, but it kind of, if you can make those numbers work if you explain it in the way that kind of makes sense. 3 shows a week, 5 hours of content plus BR, pay-per-views plus whatever they're going to do with streaming when that happens.
I don't think it's a wild figure at all when you look at like how they're performing. And if you get Collision that's consistently doing a 0.24 in that range, I don't think it's a wild figure in the least. And Brandon, I know we often go over this, but can you just provide a bit of a timeline now? Like, let's assume this option is picked up by WBD, which has never been outright stated, but feels assumed at this point when you're launching Collision. How close in proximity are the Raw and SmackDown deals with NBC Universal and Fox with AEW's deal with Warner Brothers? Like, how close are we talking about these rights coming up in proximity to one another?
I think they're 3 months apart. Now, Tony's never gone on the record and said we expire, December, either 2023 or 2024. But that's what I believe. And I guess that's based on reading Dave's original report back in January 2020 when they renewed this deal from being whatever it was, the cost of production plus ad rev share, to actually being worth $44 million a year. So I took that to mean it began in January, and it's 3 or 4 full years, which would make it end, assuming the option is picked up at the end of December. WWE deal ends in the fall, either September or October 2024. So that's like 3 months apart, and it seems like these deals usually get renewed about a year and a half in advance. So like right now is the prime time for both of them, I would think. And I think in AEW's case, with the addition of a new show, I imagine what's happening here is rather than making a new deal that is written and agreed to now, I think they would want to see what does Collision do for a rating once it normalizes so that we know what we're buying here.
Well, we saw what happened with the initial deal, right? They did not have a guarantee money deal originally when they went to TNT, and they immediately renegotiated that or restructured whatever that deal was because what they were able to generate. I think there was a lot of surprises with that initial number, especially the consistency. Even today, you could see the Twitter speculation. AEW is not doing well in ratings, but the people in power, the people that really understand these things, realize the numbers are really solid. Cable's not what it was 20 years ago. You can't go based on that. You can't go based on 10 years ago or even 5 years ago. Media viewing habits have totally shifted. And to get a product that does in the proximity of 1 million viewers every week for you, live content, that goes a really long way.
Yeah. What really matters is the rank, and we can compare it to the Monday Night Wars or something like that. But and it's a fraction of whatever Raw or Nitro were doing back then. But where these shows rank is really the key. And Raw, SmackDown, and Dynamite rank quite well when you look at that Showbiz Daily chart.
Yeah, I often use the analogy for people that don't quite like grasp like the differences is that it would be like an NBA team that clinches the division with like 55 wins, and the argument is, well, they're certainly not the 98 Bulls. I'm like, well, they're not playing the 98 Bulls, and they don't need that amount of wins to win the conference. The 55 wins is where the parity was this year in the season, and this is the first place team. So you're going by these rankings that they're up against the current competition. And while we're talking about rankings, something that has certainly elevated itself in these last 2 weeks has been NXT with an infusion of main roster talent. And we saw them rank 4th last week, 5th this week, and they are poised to do a very big number next week when you have a Seth Rollins match on television. So clearly an edict, Andrew, that they are very much beefing up their third property. And it makes a lot of sense given the negotiations and a lot of interesting tactics that Nick Khan has pretty much disclosed in a lot of these recent speeches.
Yeah, I find Nick's approach really different when it comes to especially pro wrestling. He doesn't treat it like he works for a pro wrestling company. He treats it like he works for any major sports property or a media company. And the transparency has been really interesting to see when he's having these conversations and he's saying, yeah, we're open to moving Raw. We're open to adding this,
Third hour SmackDown.
A 4th hour. He said a 5th if he could do it.
8 hours of Raw.
He actually said that to me in person when I saw him a couple of years ago, and we were it was an event here in New York, and I brought it up to him about it. He's like, I would do 5 hours if I could. I could do 6 hours if I could, because it's a money generator. They know that. I think WWE right now is in a tremendous boom period with attendance gates and viewership, and that key demo on SmackDown was, I mean, tremendous. You know, over 3 million viewers for that last segment. With what was it? I think it was a point. Was it 0.7?
The final quarter averaged 2.9 million viewers. I've not seen minute by minute. It's possible one of the minutes was over, or some of the minutes were over 3 million.
Yeah, I mean that's super impressive.
Yeah, it was that pie face to Jimmy. You know that the minute by minutes just spiked on that pie face,
spike right
that
there.
reaction from the crowd. I mean, Brendan, are you looking at kind of what is your thought on how NXT plays a role in these negotiations, and that it's another interesting bargaining chip that they have? And this also comes on the heels of this Twitch deal that we haven't discussed, which, you know, sounded like a very interesting deal on Monday. In watching the execution of it Monday night, it felt like this team got the notice about this that morning.
You were watching Drew Gulak eat, right? Is that what was happening?
Dude, within 10 minutes, the guy is like having a snack while he's eating. I cannot stand eating when people are talking. It is the biggest detriment anyone can commit into my ears, is eating while speaking. And I mean, it was just literally like the three of them talking for about an hour and 40 minutes. And then Megan Morant had to take off. She had to do Raw Talk. Ryan Papola from The Bump, he had to get going. And then it's just on Drew Gulak's channel for the last thing. And no promotion of this at all on Raw, which I found interesting, whether that was a WWE call of wanting to do a soft launch and work out kinks, or if NBC Universal does not want WWE actively sending people to a non-NBC Universal property during our show as an alternate broadcast.
Well, for NXT, those rights actually expire this fall. So I would expect an announcement sometime in the next few months, at least. I mean, if it's not renewed, I imagine it's going to stay with NBCU. But maybe it just gets extended an additional year so they can work something out with the new deals. But there's NXT to deal with. And what's the value of it? I think it's not been that much in the last few years, although it's doing a lot better now. I'm looking at the year-over-year differences, and it's up 20% in the demo. It's about flat in total viewership, but the demo probably matters more because that's where the ad sales are. But if they can make it into something stronger, if I'm an executive though, like I'm not sure that this is what NXT is going to do long term until I see a longer track record here, because it's only been, in the last 6 months or so that NXT has been doing incrementally better. We'll see what happens as the months go on. I think a big piece, in addition to NXT, and probably comparably important, is where the next day rights go, which were extended to align to be coterminous, as Brandon Ross would say, with the live rights. So where did those go? Because I would imagine that those have a similar value, current value, to whatever NXT is getting, maybe in the neighborhood of like $10 or $20 million or something like that.
With SmackDown, Andrew, like that seems to be the most interesting piece in all of this, because there seems to be like this could be a choose your own adventure of where this show ends up, in what iteration, what length. Are there any interesting ideas you see for SmackDown? And I mean, ultimately, can you see this staying on Fox? Do you see some interesting alternatives of how you market this 2-hour show that is, for all intents and purposes, if you are delineating between the two, is the A show at this point? And I think it's very clear to see when you have your biggest story playing out on this show each week.
I think as far as for Peacock goes, the negotiation with NBCU, you would kind of want everything under one roof. I think it's vital for them to attempt to try to get that. Now, I know that it was a cost problem last time. They couldn't justify the cost of paying what Fox paid for SmackDown. I don't believe that they would give it up. They would just say, we don't want it. I think the reality is Fox wants to keep them as a property. Now, whether or not it makes sense financially, that's an important thing. But like you said, the next day rights go a long way. And if NBC could grab the next day rights for that and continue on, the same goes for AEW. We don't really know what they're going to do next day rights. So
those have no home currently.
There is no home. It's all over the place. You could watch on TNT or you could watch on TBS, and that's really not a way to do it. There's no next day rights deal going on. We'll see what happens with Max, but the next day rights are as important as live viewership in the next couple of years, as we go over to change the viewing habits.
And I will give everyone an update. I am still getting daily inquiries. How can I watch Collision in Canada? I'm trying, folks. I think I've angered the people at TSN. I think
Is that why these ticket sales are not good? Is because no one knows where they're going to watch it.
I mean, listen,
They don't even know if it's a real show in Canada.
It's like at this point, you don't know where it's going to end up. I would think at the very least, TSN Plus can that's TSN's streaming platform, which is how we watch Rampage up here. It is not on television in Canada. That would be the least. But TSN Plus, who's got the relationship with AEW, they did not touch All Access. Like if you had no access in Canada to All Access.
So how did you watch All Access?
You know what? I had to do some digging, Brandon, online to go find this show and follow along.
You can watch it on Max now, I think. Maybe it's starting tomorrow, actually. But you don't have Max either.
Another service we don't get here in Canada. Jeez, it's not a great day to be a Canadian if you're in America. Just all the little things we are missing out on. We'll wrap up in a couple of minutes, Andrew. But I also wanted to just talk a little bit about sort of your career and where you have sort of growing yourself into, a very well-known wrestling reporter and such. And how would you kind of just assess the landscape at this point and where you overall feel like the overall wrestling media landscape stands, the health of it all?
I think, what we're doing now is what is the most healthy that it's ever been. There's synergy amongst different type of journalists and different type of media personalities, and people work together to put together true stories rather than speculative, nonsense and filling in the blanks. I think it's really healthy. We have great people covering stuff. Wrestlenomics, unbelievable numbers. It's my cheat sheet every week for my shows more than anything else. But I
producer
think
of your show.
Yeah. I think that the business is changing and it's healthy right now and it's in a boom period. So it's positive all around, and having competition, having AEW exist has really changed how wrestling is covered now. I think both companies are more open to talk to media, and both companies are more open to having conversations that they normally wouldn't have had.
I think press conferences by WWE that happen now with Pollock and wrestlers, will those even be happening if AEW wasn't doing them earlier?
I don't think so. I don't think it would be happening. It's more of a sports thing. This is what you see at the end of every, playoff game. There's a press conference happening, and I think it's healthy. You have to have communication, and it also, it trains people on when to ask and how to ask, and as long as you get the answer that you're looking for, it works out in the end. I find the pressers to be hysterical for AEW. I think AEW's one is more of a Wild West scenario compared to what Paul's doing with his press conferences, where it's way more structured with the questioning. I just think that we're in the healthiest period that we've been in a very long time, and hopefully it continues that way.
Yeah, I feel with the press conferences, like they're still, to me, it's certainly like an open line of communication with a Paul Levesque, with a Tony Khan. It's the performers that I don't know if they quite understand, like, what is my role here? Is this still a WWE production where I am playing Otis, for lack of a better comparison? Am I coming out as just myself? And I think you're going to have performers that are going to shift from one to the other. And some are like a Bryan Danielson, perfect for that kind of a setting. And others where, like a Tony Storm that you were there for, Brandon, like for some media, maybe that is the kind of content that they want. And it's going to depend on what your outlet is, what you're seeking for these. But I think the performers are somewhat in this gray area of, is this an AEW production, or is this a media event that is for the media?
In my experience, like, there's, depending on who the media member is and what kind of media they produce, I think they have different interests in asking different questions. Like, I guess what I'm getting at is there's a lot of media members who are happy to ask a kayfabe question and get a kayfabe answer, and then there's some stuff in the middle, and then you'll have like just me who will like only ask questions to Tony or something like that.
You would never eat a pickle?
I've not eat a pickle, no, nor a cupcake. No, thank you.
Yeah. No eating at these press conferences. As I said, that was actually my biggest gripe with that press conference with Punk, was doing this all with a full mouth of a cupcake, no less.
Must be terrible for you.
Yeah.
Mindy's has to make some kind of appearance in these next couple of months. I would feel
that
like,
our next
so.
guest?
Oh, Mindy. I actually had a thought of trying to reach out to Mindy and see if she was aware of like what an imprint she has made by default of this connection with CM Punk. But maybe like we got at the first dance with all those ice cream bars, maybe Punk is going to feed the United Center with Mindy's.
Yeah.
I mean, you want to get over as a babyface. That's what you do, right?
That's it. What kind of, we'll end on this, Andrew. What are your expectations on the reactions for Punk post Chicago, like that next week, if he's in Toronto, Hamilton, the subsequent cities afterward? Do you expect it like here is the big star that in person he's going to be just mega over to these crowds, or do you sense that there's going to be a mix once you get outside of Chicago?
I expect it to be more in the favor of Punk returning, but it also depends on who he's in a program with. You know, I think him and Joe would be interesting to see. That may be a little bit of a negative because a lot of people like Joe. Putting him in with FTR is a smart bet. Maybe you could do that for a couple of weeks, but I think it's going to go city to city. If they're in New York, he might get booed. If they're in, Rancho Cucamonga, they may get booed. But I think generally it's going to be positive.
Collision in Rancho Cucamonga. That needs to be that's what you oppose a WWE pay-per-view with.
Yep. They're doing a Dynamite in Edmonton, and Kenny is from Edmonton, right?
Winnipeg.
Okay. Yeah. Okay, they're not going to Winnipeg. They've been to Winnipeg recently. Okay.
Yeah, maybe Punk will bring out Brett for cover in Edmonton. He'll bring him up, or at least maybe Oj potentially. Well, Andrew, do let all of our viewers let them know where they can hear more of you. Of course, co-hosting Wrestling Observer Live, We're Live, Pal, and of course the Matt Med podcast. Where can they go to find more of Andrew Zarian?
If you go to WrestlingObserver.com, you can check me out every Sunday. We're Wrestling Observer Live. We're Live, Pal, every Tuesday on Wrestling Observer, and Matt Men on the Matt Men channel. But if you follow me on Twitter at Andrew Zarian, you could get all that info.
Is there anyone that has a better backdrop, with due respect to Brandon Thurston, than Garrett Gonzalez? I mean, the backdrop with Dave Meltzer's office, to me, it gets me every time when I'm on with him. It spooks me that I feel like Dave is right over his shoulder.
Every now and then, John, every now and then, Dave will turn and look right at the camera and turn back. I don't know what it is. Every now and then.
Phenomenal. Well, Andrew, thanks so much for jumping on with us. It was great to have you on the show. I'm sure we will do this again. And
absolutely,
a great work on like all your reporting for this. Like you've been on top of Collision right from the get-go.
You know, I told my wife yesterday we were when they put that Punk commercial that he's back on the TV. I'm like, well, I'm done. I'm wiped out. That was the last bit. That was the last story. The match announcement was the last thing I had. So now I'm retired. I'm finished.
Yeah, because we know it'll all be smooth sailing here when it comes to CM Punk, AEW. Like everything's going to work out peacefully. They're just gonna happily ever after. This is it. We're all going to be out of work after this. But thanks a lot, Andrew, and we'll chat with you soon. Thanks a lot.
I'll see you guys. Take care. Thanks for having me.
All right, well, getting into a Collision there, and yes, we did have the match announcement on Wednesday night that it will be CM Punk and FTR taking on Jay White, Juice Robinson, and Samoa Joe on that first show at the United Center, which has roughly put out about 8,000 or so tickets, and probably is going to get a healthy bump over the final 10 days before that show at the United Center as it gets the big push. And maybe do we get one more announcement next Wednesday on Dynamite for Collision with
what's there left to announce? We'll hear from CM Punk.
What is there left to announce? There's always another announcement, Brandon.
Another major announcement at Collision. What do you think it's going to do for a rating on the 17th?
First show, I think that they are going to do a 0.3 in the demo. That's my prediction. I'm going to say 815,000 viewers.
I'm looking at the big spreadsheet and I'm thinking, what is Dynamite doing now? And I think that's kind of an over-under. Will it do what Dynamite has been doing for the last month or so, which, you know, last week, we don't know what last night's did yet. We will in a couple hours, but last week's did a 0.29 in the demo. Week before that did a 0.32 in the demo. So I think that's probably a good over-under, whatever Dynamite is doing to drive people to go outside of their normal, you know, viewing routine and watch this show. I would say high 20s, low 30s. What it does from there, I would say in the teens, once it normalizes.
Yeah, it's been a long time that we have seen like a franchise that just seems so centered around one individual. Like, you take Punk out of this mix, I'm very low on what a average Collision would do. And honestly, like, if you are relying on Punk on a weekly or even bi-weekly basis, I mean, that novelty will wear itself out. Like, this is going to have to be a self-sustaining show that you do have several stars that can create habits for people on Saturday nights to watch this show. And at least the early indicators are that, when I had asked Tony Khan on the last conference call, like, your positives you see about a Saturday, like, he did note, like, this is the best night of the week to draw for live events. And week one has shown that, but we have not seen that in terms of other cities, that at least the curiosity of a new show is not enough for people, that it's just the AEW launching a new show and we know it's going to be a great wrestling show, but it has not really galvanized that audience to just take it at their word that this is going to be something I need to buy my tickets for in advance.
And I mean, live events are nice. And even in the event that all these Collision events are selling out, the most important thing, the biggest media revenue source is media, is your TV rights fees. So that's greatly more important what the TV rating is versus what the ticket sales are, even though the TV ratings are hard for some people to understand sometimes.
So if there's one lesson to take from this, potentially, one of the early lessons of Collision, much like that year WrestleMania was in Seattle and didn't do a great pay-per-view number, and they blamed it on Seattle, Canada's fault.
It could be Canada's fault, yeah.
It's Canada. Let's blame Canada.
Yeah.
Chicago's doing great. What's wrong? It's not us. It's Hamilton. It's Toronto. What's going on? You can't go to 2 nights of wrestling in Toronto?
It's all
you will not be going to
free
Collision
healthcare.
in Toronto, correct?
Appointments or something. What's that?
You will not be going to Collision in Toronto. You're just going to Forbidden Door?
I'm not planning on because I'm just going to drive to Toronto and then drive back home to Buffalo. So I don't think I'm going to do that drive 2 days in a row.
Yes. I did get my media credential for Forbidden Door. And then the other day, I got an offer from somebody that offered me for free a front row seat at Forbidden Door. And I had to forgo the offer. I was like,
really? Was it opposite the hard cam?
I don't know if it was opposite the hard cam. Knowing this person wouldn't surprise me. So there, I could have been a meme by the end of the night with my stopwatch and my notes.
You could have been holding up a giant Wei Ting head.
Yeah, I only have so many hands to keep busy. But yes, while we haven't really had a chance to talk about this, have you followed at all the whole LIV Golf PGA situation this week, where they are coming together along with the PGA's DP World Tour, which is their European league, and this sounds like this was an unbelievably secretive event kept to a very small amount of people, and they just stunned everyone earlier this week with the announcement of a merger where the Public Investment Fund, in not so many words, has kind of taken over control of golf pending the approval of this merger.
Yeah, it's really curious why they didn't. I mean, given this, that they've wanted to get into big time pro sports, curious why they didn't apparently make a stronger bid for WWE. From reading over that big filing, it's pretty clear to me that the anonymized bidders that are mentioned there, besides Endeavor, which is not anonymous, are Liberty Media, who made the offer, which needed financing, and then apparently another bidder, which I think is NBC Universal / Comcast, made an offer for whatever the stock price was at the time. I think $76, $77 per share. And there's no evidence to me in that filing that the Saudis made a really strong bid for WWE. Obviously, they made a bid for Formula One, which was reported, right, and didn't get it. They're doing this. So I don't know if they were saving up or what the deal is, but Jay Monahan, who is the commissioner, right, of PGA.
This dude's been scorched this week, and rightfully so.
Has been up until now has been tearing down the LIV Golf and saying that he's aligned with the families of the victims of 9/11, and now they're
gets into bed with them.
In business with
he pretty much had to state this week. I know a lot of people will claim I'm a hypocrite, and basically saying I can accept being called that. Essentially, like, this guy is just there to be. I mean, I don't know. It's just such an awful look, but I mean, it's par for the course. No pun intended there.
There's a PR playbook for this that we've been studying for the last 4 or 5 years, and you say, PGA and LIV Golf, we're changing the world. We're being part of the change here. Is there a women's tour that's going to be a part of this? I guess there's the women's PGA, right? LPGA.
Yeah, it's interesting as well that you figure like how this works with all their television partners that they are contracted to the PGA and did not want anything to do with LIV Golf. LIV Golf had to get the deal on the CW, and how that all works now as well, because these are long-term deals that the PGA has. I think they go through like 2030 or so with the various networks like CBS and NBC and ESPN. But it's a very interesting story, and certainly just dovetails on what a lot of our conversations have been in WWE and how close this came to being in WWE as one of the suitors with the Public Investment Fund. And I would venture to guess that this is probably not the end. Like, for those unfamiliar, like the Public Investment Fund, from what I've seen, is it's worth about $700 billion is in this fund, and they expect it to grow to over $1 trillion. So it is like ungodly amounts of money that they have to run and operate. You would think like the PGA is merely step one in a significant like imprint that they want on a worldwide basis in sports, and probably going beyond sports.
Well, they own Newcastle United soccer team, right? According to my notes, the PGA has a deal with CBS, NBC, and ESPN, which expires 2030, average annual value of $700 million per year. So that's like, almost double what Raw and SmackDown are combined. A little bit less than that.
And as well, Collision, we had the blank date of July 29th that has now been filled. Collision on that night will go to the site of Raw from this past Monday, the XL Center in Hartford, Connecticut, which featured a crowd that Wei Ting was very, very negative on for their lack of heat. So we will see if we get a different audience for July 29th. So now they have announced Collisions through August the 12th, which is the date in Greensboro, North Carolina, which is a show that the Greensboro Coliseum has advertised CM Punk for. And I would guess at some point we get some kind of idea of what Punk's schedule is going to be beyond just the United Center. Is he on Forbidden Door? Is he going to be weekly on Collision? Because I think his involvement is going to mean a lot for these shows, and whether they are going to I think there will be a very distinction between Punk shows and non-Punk shows.
Yeah, I know they wanted to do the Hiroshi Tanahashi match last year until Punk got hurt, so that's something that maybe they'll do, and I mean, why not? Yeah, if they're going to Hartford, I wonder if Vince McMahon will be there for that one as well.
That's a great question. Maybe Vince is going to show up and want to change the script the day of the show for AEW, offer his insight. Maybe, he'll go up to Adam Cole and say, "You're looking a bit frail. Maybe you're a better manager than you are a main event babyface." Yeah. Did you watch that promo? Where they're going to have a piss test.
Yeah, I had it on mute, and I did see the closed captioning, and I did see something that was alluding to drug tests. I thought that was very interesting. That's a choice. I wonder, I don't know what the approval process is if something like that actually gets approved by Tony or not. But along the lines of that subject, about a year ago or so, it was around the time that Jeff Hardy was getting arrested for his last DUI. There was a media call, and Sean Radican asked something about a wellness policy and whether there was one. He said there was one. And then I asked if there was drug testing. He said there was drug testing. Is drug testing? I believe they're allowed to test the wrestlers as part of their contracts. I'm guessing that that's for cause and that there's no random drug testing.
Yeah, I seem to recall that was the joke during the 90s period about WWF and do they test? And it would be like, yes, well, if they suspect usage, it's like, well, what it constitutes suspecting is like, well, if they're walking around with a syringe in their ass, then we would have cause.
Yeah, if you're passed out in the locker room, maybe we would test you. Maybe.
Yeah, we will. Well, maybe that question will be brought up, or maybe they'll do the Lance Storm, Tommy Dreamer angle where MJF's going to piss into a cup and then Cole dumps it over his head. Yeah,
it's hard to be drug tested if when you give your sample you make the cup melt. So we'll see what happens.
We can only guess of where this program goes further. Well, we are going to be winding down and planning to be back next week. How are you enjoying the weekly Pollock and Thurston sessions, Brandon?
It's very good. Do you want to share my screen for me? We can talk. Do you want to talk briefly about the SmackDown quarters?
Yes, let's go over. This was a huge. Look at that. Look at the Roman Reigns effect here. This is not great news for loyal listener Jermaine from Chicago, but the facts are the facts. Look at this growth. So the Bloodline segment was pretty much, I would say, 29 of the final 30 minutes. And of course, this is the the final quarter, jumping to 2,901,000 viewers.
Yeah, was it that long? Because we've got other stuff here in the second to last quarter hour. LA Knight post-match angle, the Viking Raiders, and ad break. I will admit I'm not the one who wrote the quarter hour labels here. Jason Omperser did. But anyway, this is 2.9 million viewers for a quarter, and I think I have every AEW quarter ever. I mean, it's the only company that's been around since 2019, and I have WWE quarters going back to early 2022. I do not have a quarter hour data point that is as high as this 2.9 million viewers. This is the third highest demo quarter hour data point that I have. There are 2 quarter hour data points in the post WrestleMania Raw for this year that were higher. So, I mean, you can see that people watching the video can see that the trend lines here, which show you where this show usually goes on average over the course of the last 90 days, how this show as a 2-hour show trends from quarter to quarter. And those last 2 quarters zoom well above where the normal trend is. And I often say that quarter hours are hard to decipher and they're hard to get really meaningful narratives out of, except for times like this where it's super obvious and it's undeniable. And there's no question that like it was the content that drove this difference to happen.
Yeah, I mean, when it kind of breaks the scale like this, it's really hard to deny what the cause of it was. So this was the largest audience since the Cena show on December 30th when he wrestled the tag match, and highest quarter since that big Christmas Day episode that had the NFL lead-in at the end of 2020, I believe.
Highest demo?
18 to 49 audience.
Yes, highest demo since the Christmas Day 2020 NFL leading game, and accepting that highest since March 20th. So, I mean, SmackDown and Raw, for that matter, continue to do better than they were doing last year. Yeah,
I mean, Raw had it was their highest audience since the day after WrestleMania, and the third hour, it was a very strong third hour for them with, again, another Seth Rollins championship match with Damian Priest. So you can look at SmackDown on Friday was a grand slam. Raw was a very, very solid, I would say a solid number given what they were up against. And NXT this week, 2 weeks in a row, that it's performed well. So you have all 3 shows that are, I don't know if SmackDown can replicate it this week, but they are building it again around a big bloodline story point with Jey Uso having to make his big decision. So we will see if the same magic that worked for LeBron James works for Jey Uso with the decision this Friday.
Couldn't come at a better time for WWE for them to be doing better ratings lately.
Yes. Were you surprised that they didn't just trot out Vince McMahon on Monday? What the hell?
Wasn't there some comment that like he's done as a character? He's committed to that?
I think he's been done as a character since he blew up in a limousine 15 years ago. And
he's mentored Austin Theory since then.
Have we seen the last Vince McMahon on-screen appearance? I say no. Absolutely not.
What do you mean by on-screen appearance, though?
Showing
I imagine he'll...
Not like some... like physically on Raw, on SmackDown, coming out to his music.
Depends on like how long he lives, I guess. Probably last... I probably... Because I think there's... if we're factoring in all the possibilities here, I mean, I think there's a possibility that this merger gets completed, and I'm not saying that this is going to happen, or I believe this is
him and Ari Emanuel walk out with Dana White on Raw.
I think there's a possibility that after this merger is completed and he no longer has controlling voting power, that he's quite vulnerable, and if there's more scandal news that breaks or something like that, that he could possibly be removed. I'm not sure what the legalities are around that, but I would think if there's a time where, not to be too conspiratorial, but if there's a time where you're going to remove Vince McMahon, it's soon after that, after he actually has not no more power, but it has way diminished power.
All right. Well, on that note, we're going to wind things down. So thank you to everybody for joining us. We will be back next week, and we're working on some big guests over the next while. So we will keep you all up to date on our next guest. If you have any requests, be sure to throw them up in the comment section. You are more than welcome to. Tonight, Wei Ting and I will be joined by Brandon from New Jersey. We are doing a live watch along at 8:15 p.m. Eastern time at postwrestlingcafe.com. We are going to be doing a research study into the #1 show on Wednesday nights. We are going to be watching Vanderpump Rules, as we will discover what is this phenomenon that is in its 10th season and has had an explosion in popularity on Wednesday nights. So that is coming up tonight on our live watch along. For fans of Wrestlenomics, they will be back on Sunday. And where can people get the latest and greatest from Brandon Thurston, from ratings news, quarter-hour breakdowns, and your news updates?
Well, first, I'm excited for the Brandon from New Jersey watch along, and I think that is in fact the secret that WWE may need to make these sidecasts on Twitch more exciting. They need to book Brandon from New Jersey, perhaps.
No one will be allowed to eat on this watch along tonight. I promise.
What was he eating?
Oh, it was like some chips or some kind of like granola or something. He was just eating it out of a bag, and it just felt like, man, this is 15 minutes in. I could not possibly imagine sitting down and watching this as opposed to Raw. Like, obviously, they can't show footage. They couldn't even have like the audio in the background or anything. Right. It just felt so un-WWE in terms of just a production. And you read this press release and it's like, it feels like, okay, here's a significant deal for them that you would assume. And you watched it and it was as bare bones as you could imagine a WWE setup to be. And
no Manning cast.
No. And I mean, at least there you have like, it's all the ESPN synergy behind that. And this, like, you could watch Raw. You would have had no idea this thing was even happening.
Yes. So anyway, more Core Hour reports are coming out on the Patreon, patreon.com/Wrestlenomics. That'll be tomorrow. Those Core Hour reports should come out. Dynamite rating later today. We'll have that reported when those come out this afternoon. And Wrestlenomics Radio is back, I believe, with Jesse and with Chris Gullo. Jesse Collins and Chris Gullo. Sunday live on YouTube at 11 a.m. Eastern, and after that on your podcast app, both on the Post Wrestling feed and the Wrestlenomics Radio Wrestling feed.
Yes. And if you check out Brandon's updates, the other day he had some really interesting live attendance and gate information for several AEW and WWE major events from 2022 and 2023 from the secretive world of Polestar.
Yes.
That for about, I think the Public Investment Fund could barely afford a yearly subscription to, but it's
expensive. I'm considering... We'll talk about that offline. I'm considering getting the subscription. Will give you like a 3-month window into everything. So
yeah, maybe we'll link up with like a dozen other sites and we'll go in on an account together for Polestar information. We'll we'll find out more about that. But thanks to everyone for joining us. That is it for Pollock and Thurston. Thank you to Andrew Zarian for joining us, and that is it.